I'm 27 years old and until 2 weeks ago, I was living in my parents' house. Before anyone jumps down my throat about being a freeloader, let me explain the situation because it's not what you think. Actually, you know what? Even if it was what you think, what happened at that dinner table was absolutely unhinged. Let me give you the background first. I'm the older son. My brother Wesley is 24 and he's basically been the golden child since we were kids. I'm not saying this because I'm bitter. I'm saying it because it's just a fact. Wesley went to business school, came back home, joined our dad's construction supply company, married his high school girlfriend Jade, bought a house 3 streets over, and basically lived the exact life my parents dreamed of. Good for him. Seriously, I don't have a problem with Wesley doing what makes him happy. Me, though, I went a different route. I got my degree in software engineering, worked for a few tech companies, built up some solid savings, and eventually started doing freelance consulting work that pays really well. I've been making good money for about 4 years now. The thing is, my parents never really understood what I do. My dad, Henry, especially thinks anything that's not physical labor or running a traditional business is basically fake work. He's told me multiple times that I'm wasting my education on playing with computers. About 3 years ago, my parents were going through some financial difficulties. The company was struggling. They'd refinanced the house twice and they were genuinely worried about losing everything. I'm not going to get into all the details right now, but let's just say I helped them out in a major way that they don't actually know about. I'll explain more about that later because it becomes very relevant to this story. For now, just know that I had my reasons for moving back into my childhood bedroom at 24. And those reasons weren't because I couldn't afford my own place. Living at home was supposed to be temporary. While I sorted some things out, I paid for my own food. I cleaned up after myself. I stayed out of everyone's way. I worked from home most days in my room with the door closed. My parents and I had this unspoken agreement where I just existed in the house, and we didn't really interact much beyond basic pleasantries. It wasn't warm and fuzzy, but it worked. Then, about 6 months ago, things started getting weird. My mom, Nora, started making comments about how long I'd been there, how Wesley had his own house, how at my age, I should be thinking about my future. I mostly ignored it because I knew what I was doing and I had my own plans. But the comments got more frequent and more pointed. My dad started joining in, asking when I was going to get a real job, when I was going to contribute to the family business, why I was still living like a teenager. I should mention that my uncle, my dad's brother, has been living in their basement for 18 months. He's 52 years old, actually doesn't have a job and spends most of his time watching sports and complaining about his ex-wife. But apparently that's fine because he's family going through a hard time. Meanwhile, I'm working 40+ hours a week from my laptop, but somehow I'm the bum. 2 weeks ago on a Thursday night, we're all sitting down for dinner. Mom made pot roast. Wesley and Jade came over because Thursday dinners have been this family tradition forever. My uncle was there, too, positioned at the table like he's the head of some council. I'm eating my food, minding my own business when my dad stands up and slams this printed invoice down right next to my plate. The paper literally rattled my glass. Everyone went quiet. I looked down at this itemized bill with my name at the top, and I swear to God, my first thought was that this had to be some kind of joke. But Henry's face was dead serious. The invoice listed 3 years of back rent at $400 per month. Utilities listed separately at $150 per month, something called family household contribution at $250 per month. It totaled $14,400. My dad folded his arms and told me that they'd accepted me as a write-off for years, but that ends now. He said I'd been living off their charity long enough and it was time to pay what I owed. My mom jumped in immediately and said they're charging interest now, 15% monthly like a real landlord would. She said, if I thought I could just coast through life without contributing, then I had another thing coming. Wesley actually laughed. He said, "Bro, your credit score is about to be negative." Jade was smirking into her wine glass. My uncle nodded along and muttered something about tough love being the only way with bums like me. I sat there looking at this invoice, and I'm not going to lie, I was furious. But I wasn't surprised. I'd been waiting for something like this, not this specifically, But I knew eventually the resentment would boil over into something big. My parents have spent 3 years watching me work from home, seeing packages arrive with computer equipment, knowing I'm doing something but not understanding it or respecting it. To them, I'm just the son who refused to fall in line, who wouldn't join the family business, who wouldn't follow Wesley's perfect example. My mom slid a payment plan across the table. First $2,000 due Friday or they sell my car to cover it. I'd parked my 2019 Toyota Camry in their driveway and apparently they'd decided it was collateral now. The payment plan had monthly installments listed out, interest calculated, everything formatted like an actual legal document, even though it absolutely wasn't. I picked up the invoice and read through it again while everyone watched me. My dad said this wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of facts. I owed them this money and I was going to pay every cent or I was out. My uncle added that this is what happens when you take advantage of people's generosity. Eventually, they wise up. Here's the thing, and I need you all to understand this part. I wasn't hurt. I wasn't even that angry in the moment. I was ready. I'd been ready for 3 years. Everything I'd done since moving back into this house was preparation for the day they'd inevitably show me exactly who they were. And here it was, laid out in 12-point Times New Roman font. I didn't argue. I didn't defend myself. I didn't try to explain that I make more money than Wesley, that I've been self-sufficient this entire time, that I had very specific reasons for being in this house. I just folded the invoice, put it in my pocket, and told them I'd think about it. My dad said, "There's nothing to think about. Friday or the car gets sold." My mom said maybe this would finally teach me some responsibility. Wesley was still grinning like this was the funniest thing he'd ever seen. I finished my pot roast because honestly it was pretty good and I wasn't going to waste it. Then I went upstairs to my room. I packed 2 bags with clothes and important documents. Everything else I owned was either digital or replaceable. By 9 p.m., I was in my car pulling out of the driveway. Nobody came out to stop me. Nobody called. I drove to a hotel, checked in for a week, and started making arrangements. The next day, I texted my mom that I'd moved out and wouldn't be paying their fictional invoice. I told them to consider us even and to have a nice life. She responded that I was making a huge mistake and that I'd be back begging within a month. I didn't reply. I blocked all of them on my phone. Mom, Dad, Wesley, Uncle, even Jade for good measure. That was 2 weeks ago. I've been staying in extended stay hotels, looking at apartments, getting my life properly organized outside of that house. I haven't thought about them much beyond making sure certain arrangements were proceeding according to plan. The plan I'd made 3 years ago when I first moved back in. Then last Wednesday at 2:31 a.m., my phone started vibrating like crazy. I'd blocked their regular numbers, but Wesley was calling from Jade's phone. The screen lit up with her contact info. I was half asleep, but I answered because what the hell could possibly be happening at 2:31 in the morning? Wesley's voice was panicked. He said, "Dude, Mom found something in the mail and she's screaming. Please answer your phone." I asked him what he was talking about. He said I needed to call them back right now. Something about legal papers, something about the house. His voice was shaking. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about and hung up. 9 minutes later, my uncle called from a number I didn't recognize. 2:40 a.m. I answered because honestly, I was curious now. He said my parents were at his place crying, that I needed to call them immediately, that there had been some kind of horrible mistake. I asked what mistake. He just kept saying to call them, to fix this, that they didn't understand what was happening. I haven't called them back. I haven't unblocked their numbers. I've just been sitting here in my hotel room thinking about that invoice on the dinner table, about Wesley laughing, about my mom's smug face when she handed me that payment plan. 3 years ago, when I moved back home, my parents were drowning financially. I'm talking house in foreclosure territory. My dad's business was failing because he'd expanded too fast and taken on debt he couldn't service. They'd refinanced the house twice already and missed 3 mortgage payments. The bank had started foreclosure proceedings. They were maybe 60 days away from losing everything. My parents didn't tell me this directly. I found out because I still had access to some of their financial accounts from years ago when I'd helped them set up online banking. I could see the foreclosure notices, the missed payments, the threatening letters from the bank. They were trying to hide how bad things were, probably from shame or pride or both. I had money saved up, a lot of money actually, because I'd been working freelance contracts that paid extremely well, and I'm not exactly a big spender. So, I made a decision. I contacted the bank directly and paid off the entire remaining mortgage, $127,000. I bought my parents' house outright. But here's the thing, and this is important. I didn't tell them it was me. I structured it through a holding company I'd set up for my consulting work. As far as my parents knew, some investment company had bought their debt and restructured their loan into something more manageable. They thought they'd gotten incredibly lucky with a sympathetic lender who gave them a sweetheart deal. They still made monthly payments. But those payments were going into an account I controlled. They had no idea. Why would I do this? Couple of reasons. One, they're my parents, and despite everything, I didn't want to see them homeless. Two, I knew that if they found out I was the one who saved them, they'd never treat me like an equal. They'd either feel indebted and weird about it, or worse, they'd rationalize it as me finally contributing to the family the way I should have been all along. And three, I wanted leverage. I wanted security. I wanted to make sure that if they ever tried to pull something like kicking me out or treating me like garbage, I'd have options. For 3 years, I've been the legal owner of the house they live in. They've been making their monthly payments to what they think is a mortgage company, but is actually just my business account. I've been sitting on this information waiting to see what they do. Would they ever appreciate me? Would they ever treat me with basic respect? Or would they keep seeing me as the disappointment son who doesn't measure up to Wesley? Thursday night dinner answered that question pretty definitively. So when I moved out and blocked their numbers, I also sent a letter to the house, not through regular mail, through a legal courier service that requires signature confirmation. The letter informed Henry and Nora that their mortgage arrangement was being terminated and that as the property owner, I was exercising my right to establish formal landlord-tenant terms. It included documentation proving my ownership, copies of the original sale agreement with the bank, and a notice that they had 30 days to either sign a new lease agreement with me or vacate the property. The letter arrived on Wednesday. That's what they found. That's what my mom was screaming about at 2 a.m. After those initial panic calls from Wesley and my uncle, I didn't hear anything for about 12 hours. I figured they were scrambling, maybe calling lawyers, definitely losing their minds. Then Thursday afternoon, I got a WhatsApp message from a number I didn't recognize. It was Wesley. He'd created a new WhatsApp account just to contact me because I'd blocked his regular number. The message said, "We need to talk now. This is insane. You can't do this." I responded, "I can do this. I own the house. Check the documents." He called immediately on WhatsApp. I answered because honestly, I wanted to hear this. Wesley's voice was shaking and he launched into this whole thing about how this had to be a mistake. How there's no way I could own the house, how I need to stop whatever scam I'm pulling before it gets out of hand. I asked him what scam. He said whatever fake documents I'd created to mess with mom and dad. I told him the documents weren't fake. I told him that 3 years ago I paid off their mortgage in full when the bank was literally weeks away from taking the house. I told him I've owned the property this entire time and they've been paying me rent without knowing it. Wesley went silent for like 10 seconds and then just said, "That's impossible. You didn't have that kind of money." This is where it got fun. I asked Wesley how much he thought I made. He said probably like 40 or 50,000 a year doing computer stuff. I told him to try 6 times that amount on a bad year. His response was just this confused what? Like his brain couldn't process the information. I explained that I've been doing enterprise software consulting for major clients since I was 23. That my rate is $200 an hour and I bill about 30 to 40 hours a week minimum. That I have retainer agreements with 3 companies that pay me monthly whether I work for them or not. Wesley kept saying that doesn't make sense. That's not a real job. How could they pay me that much? Because I'm good at what I do, I told him. Because I solve problems that save companies millions of dollars. Because I built a reputation and a skill set that's in high demand. You know, all the things Dad said were a waste of time. Wesley pivoted to saying, "Okay, fine. But buying the house without telling them was psychotic, that I manipulated them and lied to them, and this whole thing was sick. I asked him if it was more or less sick than presenting your brother with a fake invoice for $14,000 and threatening to sell his car. He didn't have an answer for that. Then he tried a different approach. He said mom and dad were devastated, that mom had been crying for hours, that they couldn't believe I would do this to them. He said they just wanted to talk to me to work this out like a family. I told Wesley that I'd tried being family for 3 years, and they'd responded by treating me like a freeloader and literally invoicing me for rent. Now we could be landlord and tenant instead. Wesley said I was being petty and vindictive. I said, no, I was being a real landlord, with actual legal authority, unlike Dad's made-up invoice with made-up charges. The conversation went in circles for about 20 minutes. Wesley alternating between anger and bargaining and trying to guilt-trip me. Finally, I told him that I'd sent the lease terms in the letter and they had 30 days to decide. He said they're not signing anything. I said then they have 30 days to move out. He hung up on me. An hour later, I got an Instagram DM from Jade. She'd never had my Instagram before, but apparently she'd found it and sent me this long message about how I was tearing the family apart and how could I do this over something as petty as a dinner argument. She said Wesley was a mess and his parents were destroyed and I needed to fix this immediately. I responded, tell Wesley to check the family business incorporation documents while he's at it. Then I blocked her Instagram too. See, here's the other thing I haven't mentioned yet. When I paid off the house, I also looked into the business situation. My dad's construction supply company was drowning in debt just like the house. He'd taken out loans against the business, maxed out credit lines, the whole disaster. I didn't buy the business outright because that would have been too obvious. But I did something arguably better. The company was incorporated as an LLC with my dad as the primary owner. But when he'd set it up years ago, he'd made me and Wesley both minority stakeholders, just small percentages like 5% each, mostly for tax purposes. What my dad didn't know was that I'd been buying up debt that the company owed to various creditors. Nothing illegal, just purchasing the debt at a discount from creditors who wanted to get whatever they could. After 3 years of strategic purchases, I owned about 40% of the company's total debt, which according to the operating agreement gave me certain rights when it came to company decisions and restructuring. I'd been sitting on this information too, waiting. Wesley must have checked the documents like I suggested because about 2 hours after I sent that message to Jade, my phone started ringing from another unknown number. This time, it was my dad. His voice was completely different from the confident authority figure at Thursday dinner. He sounded tired and confused, and he asked me what the hell I'd done. I told him exactly what I'd done. Saved his house, saved his business, kept him afloat for 3 years while he treated me like I was worthless. Henry said I had no right to go behind his back like that if I wanted to help, I should have been man enough to do it openly. I asked him if he would have accepted help from his failure son who wastes his life on computers. He didn't answer. Then he tried to tell me that the house thing was a misunderstanding, that the invoice was just their way of trying to teach me responsibility, that they didn't actually expect me to pay it. They just wanted me to take life more seriously. I asked him about the part where Mom said they'd sell my car on Friday if I didn't pay. About the part where they had interest rates calculated, about the payment plan. He said I was taking it all too literally. So it was Schrodinger's invoice. I told him serious enough to humiliate me in front of the family, but not serious enough to actually mean what it said. He started getting angry then and said I was twisting his words. Our conversation lasted maybe 30 minutes and went nowhere. He wanted me to tear up the lease notice and pretend this never happened. I wanted him to acknowledge what he'd done and apologize. Neither of us was budging. Finally, he said we'd talk about this in person and hung up. That was 2 days ago. Since then, I've gotten messages from my uncle asking what happens to his living situation if my parents have to move. I told him that's between him and his brother. I'm just the landlord. He called me a selfish little punk who doesn't understand family loyalty. I didn't bother responding. My mom sent me a message through Facebook Messenger, which I'd forgotten to block. She said she never meant to hurt me and she's sorry if the invoice came across wrong, but this reaction is completely disproportionate and I'm ruining multiple people's lives over a misunderstanding. She said, "I'm being cruel for the sake of being cruel." I blocked Facebook Messenger. The 30-day notice period is ticking down. I haven't heard from them in about 18 hours now, and I'm assuming they're regrouping and planning their next approach. Wesley's been posting cryptic stuff on his Instagram stories about family betrayal and people showing their true colors. Jade's been liking all of them. Meanwhile, I signed a lease on a really nice 2-bedroom apartment starting next month. I've been getting my consulting work done, maintaining my client relationships, living my life. Some of you asked if I feel guilty. I don't. I feel vindicated. I feel like I spent 3 years waiting for them to prove they valued me, and instead they prove the opposite. The question now is what happens when the 30 days are up. They're not going to sign a lease with me as their landlord. Their pride won't allow it, which means they're going to have to find somewhere else to live, which means my uncle loses his basement, which means the family dynamics are about to get even more explosive. Continuing the full story as it unfolds in the original: bar meeting with Wesley, Jade's private message, former employee info, 6 days left status, Jade restaurant meeting, eviction filing, final calls, business collapse, debt offer, family fallout, Wesley's last message, and closing reflection. They wanted to treat me like a tenant,